Heidi was a little girl whose parents died when she was young. Her aunt took her to her grandfather's remote home. Heidi cheerfully greeted her grandfather. He was a stern and cold man. He was not welcoming to Heidi and her aunt. He said he wouldn't raise Heidi. Her aunt ignored his words. She kissed Heidi and left her there. Her grandfather was furious. He ignored Heidi's pleas. He went back into the house and shut the door. Heidi had no choice. She spent her first night in the Alps in the sheep pen. The next day her grandfather came to the sheep pen. He milked the goats and gave Heidi some milk to drink. He was not as indifferent to her as it seemed. He took Heidi to town to see the pastor. He hoped the pastor could find a family for her. The pastor urged him to raise Heidi himself. Her grandfather refused. The pastor insisted he'd take care of Heidi until a foster family was found. Back home, Heidi found a loft filled with straw. It had a small window that overlooked the Alps through all 4 seasons. Her grandfather allowed her to stay in the loft. At dinner, Heidi told him she didn't want to go to an orphanage. Mature children often have unspeakable grievances. Heidi was no exception. Heidi loved living in the mountains. She didn't have to wear complicated dresses. She ran barefoot on the grass. She was surrounded by animals. Peter was a little boy who herded goats for her grandfather. Her grandfather told him to take Heidi along. Heidi ran joyfully. She breathed in the intoxicating mountain air. Two goats fought. Peter angrily hit the goats with a stick. Heidi couldn't bear it. She asked Peter to spare the goats. She offered to share her lunch with him. They made a deal. After playing, Peter told Heidi that the villagers said her grandfather had killed someone. Heidi was terrified. She couldn't hide her fear when she got home. Her grandfather noticed the change in her. He asked her if Peter had said something. Heidi asked if it was true. Her grandfather told her to judge for herself. He told her to trust her eyes and ears. Heidi chose to believe him. She gave him a big hug. Her grandfather was moved to tears. One day, Heidi saw a new chair in the house. Her grandfather had made it just for her. This made Heidi uneasy. Her grandfather told her she didn't need to go to the pastor's. Heidi knew this meant he had accepted her. To get food, her grandfather took her to town. Heidi noticed people's unfriendly looks towards him. She held his hand tightly. Heidi envied the children going to school. In the grocery store, someone suggested Heidi should go to school. Her grandfather said that the heavy snow in winter made it impossible for her to go up and down the mountain. Heidi was unhappy because of the snow. Her grandfather was thoughtful. He made a sled. They laughed happily as they sped down the Alps. Heidi visited Peter's house. She met Peter's widowed mother and his blind grandmother. Heidi looked at the grandmother sincerely and asked if she couldn't see. The grandmother kindly said she could feel. At dinner, Heidi gave her food to the grandmother. The grandmother said her teeth were almost gone. She couldn't eat hard bread. Heidi remembered this. Spring came. Heidi's aunt returned to the Alps. She had found a wealthy family for Heidi to be a companion to their daughter. Her grandfather refused. Her aunt was determined. She went to the mountain where Heidi was herding goats. She lied and said her grandfather wanted her to go to the wealthy family. Heidi was taken away by her aunt. When her grandfather found out, it was too late to catch up with the carriage. Heidi was forced to leave her grandfather without even saying goodbye.